Alquist, Hancock, Blue, Price, Semidian, Wyland. You do not have
The chair notices an extreme absence of a quorum. Sergeants, will you please call the members and ask them to please come to Education Committee so that we may begin today's hearing. And where is my vice chair? It's 10 o'clock, not even 8:30.
Well, you know, I asked him, and he said, I can't even tell it. But what can I do?
You're going to say, okay, boss, she always gets on my case. You have to be here on time.
That's pretty much what I said.
Thank you.
You are welcome. Oh, sorry. Yes. Okay, thank you. They're all on their way.
We should check to see, because is Huffman out there?
Huffman, I don't know.
Do you want to check to see if he is?
Let me get the
Because
sergeant's.
If he is, we'll just take him up right away.
Senator, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know that people are waiting for Assemblymember Huffman to arrive, but I'll go ahead and do this in the interim. I'm very honored to present SB, please join us up here, SB 1422. This is a bill, you've heard a somewhat of a version in the past, and we're back again. This is the Actually, why don't I just stop, because Assemblymember Huffman has arrived. So let me just go ahead and defer to him, and we'll come right back. Okay? So I'm going to wait, and that way they can. So I'm so glad you're here, but we'll let them finish because they're waiting for him.
Assemblymember Huffman, are you ready?
I am, and I'd love to
step up to the plate.
Thank you.
Welcome. Assemblymember Huffman, you have file item 2. This is AB 7. I know there's some interest in particular on this measure, so rather than rushing through the other bill, let's just go ahead and begin with you. So thank you for the bill that you've introduced, and we look forward to your presentation this morning.
I very much appreciate that, Madam Chair, and I want to start by thanking you and Senator Alquist for being co-authors in this important legislation. Members, I have become a bit of an accidental expert on the safety risks posed by performance-enhancing metal bats. It's an issue that has been fought over for more than a decade, but which I really didn't know much about until about 2 months ago, when a major tragedy occurred in my district, galvanizing the Marin County baseball community, reigniting a national debate, and causing my constituents to ask me to take action. And what happened was this. In March, a 16-year-old baseball player in Marin County by the name of Gunnar Sandberg was pitching in a game, and he was struck in the head by a line drive. His injuries required him to be hospitalized. His condition deteriorated. He had suffered a traumatic brain injury. And eventually, doctors at the hospital had to perform life-saving emergency surgery where they actually removed a piece of his skull to take pressure off the brain and put him into an induced coma. For several weeks, he was in the ICU. He remained in the coma. The good news is he came out, and it looks like he's on his way to a fairly full recovery, we hope. In fact, today, Gunnar's family, his friends, his baseball community, and many people from Marin County were hoping to be here with you today to urge you to support this bill. But today happens to be the day he was released from the hospital to come home, and all of us agreed that it's better that they were there to welcome him. We're wishful thinkers, and so we have planned a major rally here in the Capitol in the weeks ahead. We hope for the opportunity for them to meet you and tell their story, and they do plan to meet with the governor. So there's extra urgency in my request for your aye vote here this morning. Since I dove into this issue, I have discovered that Gunnar's case is not an isolated incident by any stretch. In fact, in the last couple of months, I've heard accounts of similar injuries and narrowly avoided injuries from all over the state, all over the country, and the message that we have heard is unanimous from these folks. The hyper-performance of high-tech metal baseball bats has gone too far. It's increasing the risk of serious injury and, yes, death for young people, and we have to do something about it before more people are seriously hurt or killed. If you talk to people that have played or coached or been around the game of baseball for many, many years, people like Blaine Clemens here, who you're going to meet in a moment, you'll hear from them that the high-tech metal baseball bats have fundamentally changed the game of baseball. And it's not just the pinging sound that drives baseball purists kind of crazy. It's actually the performance of the bats, and there are several elements to that. It starts with the properties of aluminum and metal bats. And it's what we call the trampoline effect, the fact that these materials cause balls to travel at greater speed. This is what you would expect given the properties of a metal bat versus a wood bat. It's confirmed by studies, and it's fairly obvious to anybody that has observed the game of baseball a lot. In fact, I was just reading an article yesterday where a Division I NCAA coach was quoted as saying, "Any idiot can see the ball jumps off an aluminum bat faster than a wood bat." Then there's the issue of increased bat speed, and this is a key factor because aluminum bats are lighter. They are designed to swing significantly faster than wood bats. And then finally, there's the issue of the bigger sweet spot. This is the section of the barrel of the bat that generates the maximum power and velocity, and it's much larger on aluminum bats than it is on wood bats. What that means is that there are going to be more hard-hit balls because of these bats. So there are no disputes about the performance characteristics that I've just described to you for the bat. There's no dispute. In fact, the posters that we have over here are just examples of the marketing materials that bat manufacturers themselves use when they're selling their products. They admit a greater chance for power, greater velocity, greater you can hit the ball harder. They admit that there's a greater sweet spot. They admit that you're going to get greater bat speed. And these indisputable facts, along with examples like the tragedy that occurred with Gunnar Sandberg, tell us indisputably, I believe, that we have a safety issue. Because while space-age technology has produced faster and faster velocities, increased frequencies of hard-hit line drives, pitchers like Gunnar Sandberg still stand less than 60 feet away from that batter after they've delivered the pitch. It's the same distance that pitchers stood 100 years ago when Ty Cobb was swinging the same wood bat that pro players use today. And so we can analyze statistics, we can debate the relative safety of baseball.
Excuse me for one moment. We have a quorum. I want to call the roll right away.
Thank you,
Secretary,
Madam
call
Chair.
the roll.
Romero?
Here.
Romero here. Huff?
Here.
Huff here. Alquist? Hancock? Here. Hancock here. Lou? Here. Lou here. Price? Semidian? Wyland? Here. Wyland here. You have a quorum.
Members, we have a quorum. Please proceed.
So, members, we can analyze statistics and debate the relative safety of baseball versus football versus skydiving versus bocce ball, and it may be that the opponents invite you to have that kind of a debate here today, but you don't need to, because the bottom line is very commonsensical. If a metal bat makes baseballs fly faster and be hit harder, if it happens more frequently at speeds that can kill people, then by definition, you've got some increase in safety risk. Pitchers are going to have less reaction time, which means there's a greater chance of them getting hit. They're going to be put in harm's way more frequently, which means there's a greater chance of them being hit. And when they are hit by the ball, the damage is going to be worse because the ball is flying faster. Now, how serious is this safety risk? Well, it's serious enough that the NCAA in 1998 actually proposed some pretty strong restrictions on the use of metal bats. NCAA is the standard-setting entity for both college and, by incorporation, the high school baseball level. That never happened, though, because NCAA was sued by Easton Corporation, the largest manufacturer of bats, an opponent to my bill here today, for restraint of trade. And the settlement in that lawsuit put in place more lenient safety standards, standards that were proposed by the bat manufacturers, standards that ignore key factors such as bat speed, such as the sweet spot, standards that certainly have enabled the $150 million a year metal bat industry to continue growing for the last decade, but standards that seriously mask the performance and safety difference between metal and wood bats. And so as my staff and I have worked on this bill, and we've met with Gunnar Sandberg's family and the baseball community and officials and experts, we've struggled with the issue of what to do about this. There are some people who think the answer is simply to ban metal bats. That's what they have done in the state of North Dakota. It's what they've done in the city of New York. And a lot of baseball enthusiasts like this because they've never really liked aluminum bats anyway. And they point out that at all professional levels, wood bats are used. And in fact, most of the community college leagues around the West, except for California, use wood bats. And even the elite high school tournaments often use wood bats because scouts want to see players hit with wood. Others think that there's too much focus on the bat, and I think they have some legitimate points. They point out that safety might be best addressed by some type of protective gear that could be worn by pitchers. You think about other sports that have evolved in this way, and you think about the old leather helmet for football. You think about the advent of helmets for hockey players and any number of other advances in sports to provide safety. And I think there is some serious merit in consideration of those alternatives. That's why AB 7 puts all of this on the table but doesn't dictate an outcome. AB 7 is a narrowly tailored temporary measure that doesn't decide what the safety solution will be. Rather, it proposes a temporary moratorium on non-wood bats so that baseball itself can figure this out. It's a precautionary measure to level the playing field while nudging baseball officials to bring this decades-long debate to a workable, durable solution that honors the game and improves safety. Now, the need for this kind of a state leveling of the playing field, for legislation, was underscored by a recent action by North Coast Section baseball officials. The Marin County League, after the tragedy with Gunnar Sandberg, voluntarily imposed a ban on metal bats. And as the season progressed, they went to the North Coast Section and they asked that that be extended to their region for the playoffs. And the North Coast Section voted against that. And it's understandable. They decided that it's unfair to do that in the middle of a season to other teams and other players. They decided that it's unfair to put their teams and players at a competitive disadvantage against teams and players from other parts of the state that aren't going to do it. Now, I've seen quotes from other coaches around the state who would favor a switch to wood bats, but only if everybody did it. Because nobody wants to act unilaterally. Nobody wants to put themselves at a competitive disadvantage against other players. That's why we need AB 7, because it allows a workable way for this to happen, and it's fair and equitable. And frankly, if the state tells folks to do this for the next few years, they can't be sued for restraint of trade by baseball bat manufacturers. So it is very important. I think we have an indispensable role to play in creating the conditions for the baseball community itself to sort out and solve this problem. Now, I want to address one specific issue that was raised in the analysis. It's the issue of cost, and frankly, this is a very frequently raised issue in this debate. As the claim goes, baseball wooden bats break more frequently, and therefore, when you add in replacement costs, even with the higher price tag of metal bats, it's going to cost more to switch to wood. And members, I'll tell you, that is just not true. Wood bats do break. But you have to remember that they are much cheaper than metal bats. We're talking about $30 to $60 a bat versus $200 to $400 a bat, and you can do the math. Last year in Major League Baseball, the statistics showed 0.5 broken bats per game for both teams. So even if you factor in some broken bats, roughly assuming that frequency, it doesn't even come close to replacement costs that would be more than the sticker shock of these huge price tags for performance-enhancing metal bats. And that has been the experience in New York and North Dakota, where they've banned metal bats. They haven't spent more money. In fact, it looks like they may well have saved money. That has been the experience so far in Marin County, where the breakage rates and the replacement costs aren't nearly what the metal bat manufacturers would have you believe. And there's one very conclusive point on this, and that is the fact that there are new wood composite bats that don't break nearly as frequently as the old wood bat because they have reinforced materials in the handle. These bats are selling between $80 and $100, and some of them even come with a 1-year guarantee, the same as a high-end metal bat. So for both safety and cost reasons, I urge you to support this bill. And there's just one last point, and it goes to the issue of equity and equal opportunity. With top metal bats costing up to $400 or more because they deliver extreme performance, I think we all understand that serious baseball players are going to want to reach for that performance edge. If they want to get a college scholarship, if they want to someday make it in the big leagues, they're going to do everything they can to have every advantage in the sport that they love. Most schools don't pay for bats. The players do. They're on their own. So what that means is that kids in wealthy areas with affluent parents have no problem shelling out $400 for the top-of-the-line, hottest new metal bat to get that performance edge. But kids who are poor face a terrible choice. They have to either try to buy a bat that they know their family can't afford or put themselves at a performance disadvantage against rich kids. AB 7, at least for the temporary period of this moratorium, will level the playing field and it will provide equity while we sort out these safety issues. So for all these reasons, I thank you for your time. I respectfully request your aye vote. And I have with me to testify today Blaine Clemens, who has been around the sport of baseball for many years. He's forgotten more about baseball than any of us will ever know. And I thank you for your time in hearing him out.
Thank you. Let's hear from witnesses in support. Yes.
Right in the middle.
As a former professional scout,
And if you can identify yourself officially for the record.
my name is Blaine Clemens. As a former professional scout with the Atlanta Braves, as a former Division I coach and recruiting coordinator with the at University of San Francisco, as a former player and pitcher myself, I've seen all sides of metal and wood, and I can tell you that there is an extreme difference. When you read statistics, anybody can create a statistic that says in studies and in labs, here's the difference in a wood versus a metal, and you can tailor those to however you'd like to do it. The fact of the matter is, just like with cars, the person using the device, the bat that is, the person swinging the bat, has an awful lot to do with how the performance of that bat will actually work. It's much harder, from my observations, for a 16, 17, 18-year-old kid, college kid, to swing a wood bat. It's weighted differently, it's heavier, it takes a lot more extreme precision, strength, training to be good with that product. Therefore, if they can swing it slower, they don't swing it with as much accuracy, meaning a sweet spot that's 2 inches versus one that's 6, okay? They're not going to hit the ball as hard. There's going to be less danger, as the Assemblyman mentioned. The cost factor that's been identified, it's absolutely true. Even if you were to buy the high-end composite bat, say a Baum bat is a company that does this, and when I was scouting in the Northwest, the junior colleges, they use wood bats there. They will break maybe one a year. A whole team can use one composite wood bat that costs $140. An entire team can use that. That bat won't break during the course of the season. Aluminum bats do break. There's a fallacy that they don't break. They break all the time. There's a warranty on them. I coached at USF, and our players would take batting practice every day, and the walls are so thin in those bats. Our 6'4", 225-pound players that would be eventual big leaguers would break those bats one a month, sometimes more frequently than that. We'd get free replacements because we had a bat contract with Rawlings Corporation. That's another part of this thing that often doesn't get mentioned, is that the Division I schools, they shy away from this issue because, well, they have contracts. They get free bats. They're a loss leader for the industry, and it makes sense for them. As a former scout, you go to identify these players at big tournaments. You go to see the best players at the biggest high school tournaments in the summertime in Florida, Arizona, Long Beach, California. You go to see the best players play. You go to watch them swing the wood bats. We very rarely see many broken bats. You do see a bat break, of course you do. It's a natural material. If you were to use just a regular wood bat, not a composite. However, it's not as frequent as you are led to believe. The players that use them, most good players actually use wood bats all year long anyway. They only swing metal bats basically in their spring seasons. They will go play summer ball and travel ball with their wood bat teams and play wood bat tournaments because that's where the college scouts and the pro scouts go to see them all summer. They very rarely get recruited in their spring seasons. They get recruited in their summer and the fall when the colleges are not running their own seasons. And the companies that run the events, Perfect Game, who I used to work for, uses wood bats exclusively in their events. They're seen swinging wood bats all year long. So anybody that says, oh, if you don't swing metal, you're not going to get a scholarship because your stats won't be as good. Well, even that statement right there tells you that it's easier to swing metal, your stats will look better, so do it so you can get a scholarship. Well, those that identify players see through that. It takes more skill to be a good hitter with a wood bat, and those that are actually looking for those, either Division I players or professional guys, actually see that it takes a lot more skill. You can identify a good hitter much better. So the point of it is that these players use wood all year long. It's not new to them. The players in Marin that picked up these wood bats to do it this last spring, it was very familiar to them. And they had a heck of a lot more fun actually doing it. The game moves faster. The game is safer. The game is less expensive. Pitchers actually throw more aggressively and freely fastballs because they're not going to get hit as easily. They challenge hitters on the inside. They throw more strikes. The game itself, beyond the safety reasons and the cost reasons, which are the primary focuses of this bill, there's so many more altruistic or purity reasons for the game that was created many hundred-some years ago. It's just a much more fun experience. So just my experience of watching it as an observer, when you sit in the stands and you watch balls whistle by kids' heads all the time in a Division I game where you have 230-pound, 6'4" people swinging 30-ounce bats. I mean, if the bats were that important, if they were the best product to use, wouldn't the big leagues be using them?
Okay. Thank you for your testimony. Next witnesses.
Terry McHale with Aaron Reed and Associates, representing the California Athletic Trainers Association. Madam Chair, I knew these bats were dangerous when I was able to start hitting the ball out of the infield. These things just... Tomorrow, this legislature is going to honor Willie Mays. Willie Mays hit 660 home runs and got 3,200 hits in the major leagues, and he did it all with a wooden bat. And if it's good enough for Willie Mays, it's good enough for our students, too. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Next witness.
Hi, Madam Chair, members of the committee and distinguished staff. Rick Rollins, representing the California Brain Injury Association. We're in support of this measure.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support? Witnesses in opposition, please step forward. We'll hear from witnesses in opposition, and then I have a couple of questions, and we can open up for committee members as well to ask questions. Welcome. And please identify yourself for the record.
Guy Anderson, the varsity baseball coach at Cordova High School for the last 40 years and a Hall of Famer for the National Federation of High School Sports.
Please depress the red button so that the light shines. We can hear you. Thank you.
Shall I give it again? Guy Anderson, I'm the varsity baseball coach at Cordova High School. I have been coaching that level for the last 40 years and have had the distinguished honor of being given to being a Hall of Famer from the National Federation. I coach high school young men, not professionals, even though we've had a very good opportunity to send some professionals to the major leagues, such as Jerry Manuel and Chris Bosio and Jeff Jenkins and a few of those kinds. So I do know the major league responsibilities as far as looking at ball players as well. But my concern is a high school baseball player who I'd like to see him have success, and it may be his only year or two that he gets to play baseball, and then he probably goes into maybe a softball league. But again, in my experience of having well over 1,200 baseball games that I have coached, and I've been very fortunate to have won 800, and I think today, if we win today, I could win my 848th. In doing so, I have seen the wooden bat, and I've seen the aluminum bat. And as far as the opportunity for injury, I've never had a pitcher in that total time that I've coached that has had a serious injury off of either bat. I believe that the aluminum bat, of course, has come forth, one, because of economical reasons, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here for a safety reason, and that is that if I thought in any way or form that a young man would be injured as the young man was in Marin, I would certainly possibly be on the other side. But I'm not, because baseball is not a sport that doesn't have some problems. The National Federation has never really looked at this situation because they haven't been concerned with it. Because, again, the non-wooden bat and the wooden bat, level of that speed coming off the bat is not a significant difference to cause injury to a pitcher no more than one bat would than the other. I know it was mentioned here that the Major League Scouts are looking for those players that hit with the wooden bat because the aluminum bat has a little bit bigger sweet spot. Well, it does have a little bit bigger sweet spot, and it allows a young man that doesn't have the skill level to make it to a college or to a junior college or to professional baseball the opportunity to have success. And that's one of the reasons I coach, is so that young people can have success in this game of baseball. I know that there are a lot of people, traditionalists, and I happen to be one as well. I love the game of baseball. I happen to have one of Willie Mays' bats. It's a thrill and a half to have it. But at the same time, I'm more concerned with the young man at my level, at the high school level, having the opportunity to play the game. And I will tell you, the idea of only one bat being broken, yes, by a professional or by a college person, that's probably true. But if you take a 14 to 17-year-old young man that has not handled the bat very much, you will find that there are techniques to teach him how to hit with the bat, but you will also find that the bat will break a great deal. I can tell you that when I began, our budget was much bigger than it was or is today. If we go to a non-wooden bat, we have an opportunity to at least stay in the ball game, and all high schools using it gives a level playing field. But I'm real concerned, again, with the safety and the idea that we're getting told today that the exit speed is so far greater to injure that pitcher. I think one of the things we have to look at in the safety area is the possibility, just as they've done, I believe, 2 years ago in the professional area, of putting helmets, and they're doing it at the college level, and I think high school will do it next year, putting helmets on our base coaches. I think the same thing has to be looked at the pitcher's level as well.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. My appreciation to be here.
Thank you. Next witness.
Madam Chair and members, Rand Martin on behalf of Easton Bell Sports. Easton Bell Sports is a California-based company with offices in Van Nuys and Scotts Valley. We've been in California for over 80 years. Let's make it very clear that we all are concerned about safety. I don't want anybody to think that Easton Bell is any less concerned about safety than anybody else in this room. In fact, what we do is do everything we can to maximize both performance and safety, which is one of the reasons why, as I'll mention in a second, we are in the process of looking at and developing protective headgear for pitchers, as Mr. Huffman has indicated. All sports have risks, but softball is the least risky. I'm sorry, not softball. Baseball for boys is the least risky of all sports. There is a study, we've handed out portions of it to you that demonstrate empirically and unrelated to our industry empirically that boys baseball is the safest in terms of the number of injuries per exposure. Even safer than girls softball. Makes me reluctant to hang out at a girls softball game. So we've already made enormous strides over the years in making sure that this game is as safe as possible. But we are very supportive of making it even safer. There are standards now that Mr. Huffman referred to that dictate what our bats have to look like in comparison to wood bats. And the difference between the two of them by these standards is actually very narrow. But because we care about how safe it is, we're supportive of additional standards that are going to be in place in 2012 that take whatever squishiness there is between wood bats and non-wood bats out of the equation, so that when the velocity of the ball off of a wood bat or a non-bat will occur, it will occur virtually identical. The situation, as tragic as it was in Marin County, would have happened exactly the same way if that hitter had hit that ball off a wooden bat. It followed the same trajectory and hit the young pitcher, injuring him. So it's not the difference between the speed. It's really the protection of the pitcher. Actually, I just said almost everything I was going to say. Mr. Huffman talks about hyper performance. He talks about how we advertise our products. Let's not mistake advertising for standards and reality. The reality is what is the standards. It's the standards that dictate to us what we can do in terms of developing a metal bat. Finally, I want to hit on the fiscal implications, because I think people are thinking about these in terms of professional baseball. And we need to think about them in terms of high school players and what happens to them if this bill goes into effect on January 1st. The high school player in your district, Senator Romero, especially, in many districts in Southern California and LAUSD, and I know LAUSD very, very well, many of those kids are going to be unable to continue to play this game. Yes, a metal bat is more expensive at the outset, but it does last a season and maybe more. It is warranted, so if it breaks in that season, we replace it. The kid does not have to go out and buy a new one. At the same time, they're going to be using wooden bats that are the least effective, the least well-made. The pros get the best, the minors get the second best, college third, and we're last. So when it gets down to us, we have bats that are going to break far more frequently. So the kid in your district, Senator Romero, many places in your Senator Simitian, that have to purchase these bats themselves, rather than spending $200 or even $400 on a metal bat, they're going to be spending upwards of $1,000 to replace 4, 5, 6 times in a season that $60, $70 wood bat. If the safety issues could be demonstrated in the few minutes we have today, that they really were not being satisfactorily addressed by the standards, then we would say let the safety trump the fiscal implications. But because we're talking about a very level playing field, we need to take into consideration these other issues. We want to make sure that kids who are not very good, and I'm one of them, I was not very good playing baseball. I would have loved to have had a metal bat because I might have actually hit something, unlike my colleague over there who hit it out of the park with a metal bat. These are kids who want to be able to play this game. They don't want to be professionals, but they want to have success at it. They want to enjoy it, and you enjoy it if you hit the ball. If you strike out every time, I'm proof positive, you don't enjoy the game. So we urge you to consider all those implications, also to really take some time to think about the science here and what's really out there to dictate what should happen. Thank you for your time.
Okay. Next witness.
My name is Pete Jensen. I'm a baseball coach at Serra High School in San Mateo. I coached baseball for 37 years at all levels of play, from youth league to professional baseball. I also scouted in professional baseball for 7 years. I was the 2009 National Coach of the Year this past year. I'm opposed to this bill for all of the reasons that have been stated. I really feel that our game is in good shape, and I think I would try to promote the use of protective headgear but I oppose the loss of the metal bat.
Thank you. Next witness.
My name is Eric Long. I played college baseball and beyond, and I didn't notice the speed of the aluminum bat or wood bat being different from my vantage point. I hit with the bat as well. But I'm opposed to this bill, and I hope the committee looks hard at the empirical data. I think you'll find that there's no need for this to go any further. Thank you.
Any other witnesses in opposition? Okay, let me ask a couple of questions, and I'll open it up to committee members as well. One of the witnesses, I believe it was you, Rand, talked about the advertising, okay, on this issue, but advertising is something where there's a great deal of deliberation and thought about the naming of a product, because we are talking about how does one entice a consumer to buy a product. So advertising is, it's a multi-billion-dollar industry in this nation and in California. I mean, I'm looking at these boards over here, and I'm struck by, pardon the pun, I'm struck, but by some of the names. Combat. I mean, Combat's that's pretty clear what kind of a bat this is. And as I read through it, it says Combat, it's dedicated to nothing less than pushing the envelope. That's a pretty significant name for what that product implies. The other board has the Surge. That says something about a surge is something a little bit extra than ordinary. And it does talk about the maximum trampoline effect. So the names matter, the advertising is selling the product, and it says something about the product overall. As when I first learned about this, and I spoke with Assemblymember Huffman, read some of the materials, in recent years we've talked a lot about juiced athletes, steroids. To some extent, this is essentially bats on steroids. And that's what this is about today, I believe. I am concerned about the safety issues. The reports were that this 16-year-old young student, when he was struck by the ball, estimates were that the ball was flying as high as 100 miles an hour. That's a very serious issue. The fiscal costs, I think, are of real concern. It does cost significantly more, and I am concerned about the equity issues in terms of even having a level playing field. If we're concerned about juiced athletes playing on the field and having performance-enhancing drugs boost them, then likewise I am convinced by essentially juiced bats on the field giving an additional push. I heard one of the witnesses talk about it's for success. And I think if we're talking about you have to give a steroid bat to a kid to see how far the ball goes, if that's the definition of success, then I don't think we've been successful at defining success. Success could be you're a team player. You're contributing to the team effort. It's not how far that ball flies. And we can achieve that, I think, with the wooden bat as well. So I'm not convinced by the opposition. I am very concerned by the proponents of the bill. Let me ask, though, on this question, though, Assemblymember Huffman, as you've indicated, you're not prescribing in this bill what to do. You're asking for a moratorium.
Correct.
Okay, so it's a moratorium for the industry, the field, the profession, the sport, others to come together to figure out which way forward so we can address the safety and the equity issues as well. But the question raised in the analysis that I'd like for you to address is why 2014 as opposed to 2012? If you could address that question as to why we should go with a 2014 moratorium as opposed to 2012.
And Madam Chair, thank you for that question. It's a good question. And the truth is the 3 years that we initially put into the bill doesn't have any empirical backing. It was what my staff and I thought would be a reasonable time period for baseball officials and league officials and parents and others to come together and sort this issue out. However, I think the committee analysis also correctly pointed out that the NCAA, and Mr. Martin pointed out, and the opposition has pointed out, the NCAA has new standards coming online, new safety standards to reduce some of the performance advantage, we hope, for these performance-enhancing metal bats. Those standards will take effect in college in 2011. For some reason, they don't take effect in high school until the year after. So many of the top-selling bats right now in California are going to be illegal at the college level a year from now and illegal in high school 2 years from now. It could make sense, and I think the committee analysis was suggestive of this possibility, that I try to align the moratorium period with the effect date of those new standards, and I'm very open to that. It does seem to make some sense.
Would you be willing to adopt that then as an amendment in the committee?
If that would be the pleasure of the committee, I would be willing to do it.
Okay, that is something that we've suggested and urged. I think it would be wise, and it does make it consistent. So we'll go ahead and accept it as an author's amendment. Let me ask from the opposition. I mean, I did talk about these as steroid bats, and the names, Surge, Combat, they are performance enhancing in addition to the safety risk. If you could address whether or not you agree with my assessment of what these bats imply, or if you think they are just, you know,
Madam Chair, if you're willing, I'd like to have the coach respond too, but I also would like to make a statement on that.
Let's hear from the opposition.
Madam Chairman, many years ago, the wooden bat sold because of the signature on the bat. The Pee Wee Reese bat, the Willie Mays bat, that's what sold that bat. That's what the advertisers said. When I was a little guy this big, if I had a Phil Rizzuto bat, I could be like Phil Rizzuto and I would make it to the New York Yankees. I mean, that was their overall deal. I believe now, and I agree with you, some of the wording on the bats certainly could be curtailed. But that's the selling of that bat based on that, as opposed to you could be this kind of a ball player, which I don't think that was ethical either.
But let me ask this question. I heard from the opposition testimony that it was acknowledged that there was a sweet spot, that there is a bit of, remember the question of you make the kid feel better because they can hit the ball harder.
Not harder, but they could hit the ball somewhere.
You can hit the ball somewhere. There's something in that bat. There's something in that composition in that bat that provides a performance-enhancing additive in using that bat. Let me turn to Rand Martin.
Yeah, Madam Chair, we don't want to mistake one benefit of the metal bat with another. The fact that there's a better sweet spot means that you can hit it closer to either end than you can a wood bat. That's the bigger sweet spot. It doesn't mean you hit it harder or that you hit it faster or even necessarily farther. It's just, as I was saying, as a really bad baseball player, I could actually hit the ball with a metal bat that I would not be able to. But
Rand, you must have been a really bad baseball player. If you could, I mean, even I could do that, and I was pretty bad.
Or his coaching.
But we'll leave it at that.
I already mentioned
you're a great advocate for your issues, but all right. I know Senator Simitian
Madam
has
Chair, on that point, might I just interject very quickly? If you go to the website for Mr. Martin's client, Easton, and you look at the video promotions they have for their bats, they admit all of the things that we've talked about here today. They admit more power. You will hit more home runs. You will hit the ball further. In order to hit the ball further, by definition, you have to hit it faster. A ball has to travel faster to get out of the park. They admit a much greater sweet spot. They talk about huge sweet spots, which means by definition, they're going to hit many more hard-hit balls. And you know what? Even though when somebody gets hurt, they give quotes like this. They say, well, there are other factors. Baseball's a safe game. When they're selling their bats, look what they say. This bat is hot out of the wrapper and continues to get hotter, hotter, hotter. What are they talking about? The properties of these composite metal bats create even more trampoline effect after they're broken in. So we talked about some of the flaws in the safety standards that mask the differences between these bats. They also don't take into account that over time the trampoline effect gets even greater. So at some point you have to ask, are they telling the truth when they sell their bats, or are they telling the truth when somebody gets hurt and someone proposes a ban? They both can't be true.
Okay. Senator Simitian has a question, Senator Huff, and Senator Liu. We'll go in that order.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I think my issue has been addressed. You know, as Senator Huffman knows, this issue has been a subject of debate, at least inside the sport, for a long time. It's not the most recent, very unfortunate incident that has raised the issue. And I think the question when these debates start to unfold is, how do we get people to be serious and bring the debate to some resolution? If this were an outright ban, I'm not sure I could support the bill. What I think the bill does, and what I think Assemblymember Huffman is wise to have done, is said, let's force folks to pay attention to this debate and come to some resolution rather than let the debate go on endlessly. And that's what a moratorium provides for, in my judgment. the question I had was the same one that the chair had, Madam Chair, the issue of 2 years versus 3 years. I think the 2-year moratorium that aligns with the development of standards that will be applicable to high school students is a very sensible way to go. So I think, with that being said, I'm prepared to support the bill. I think it will force some real attention to this issue so that it isn't just an ongoing debate with no resolution and no improvement in safety.
Thank you, Senator Huff, and then Senator Liu.
Thank you. Well, Assemblyman Huffman, you brought to us an interesting issue today. Part of my concern is the process. This is the first policy hearing, even though it started in the Assembly, that's a gut and amend. So it's our first and probably only policy hearing, and I think this issue does deserve debate on the issue. So I'm concerned about the process. I'm not sure on this short notice, because it's only been about a week or so, that we can delve into the intricacies of this. Having said that, I'll move on and try to do that, just because it is in hearing. As far as the safety, we've heard issues on both sides, and in the short period of time, I have a scholarly article written by a PhD in physics. If I can find his name. This is from, looks like Daniel Russell, PhD, Applied Physics, Kettering University, whose conclusion, as my conclusion as a scientist after investigating these questions, and it's on this issue, is that metal baseball bats currently legal for play under NCAA and NFHS regulations do not pose a safety risk that is significantly greater than the risk of playing baseball with wood bats. Injury statistics over the last 30 years indicate that baseball is one of the safest team sports. That doesn't mean it's not without error or without injury, but one of the safest team sports played by high school and college players. Severe injuries resulting from pitchers being struck by batted balls are tragic, and I think we all agree on that, and I can understand, being a good representative of your district, you are seeking to respond to a tragic accident. While they're tragic, they are extremely rare. The available scientific evidence suggests that banning metal bats will not necessarily make the game of baseball any safer. And when you start looking at the data of where injuries come from, you have more injuries from fielding, running the bases, than you do from, this. And so that begs the question, at what point are we as a legislature going to step in with team sports? Where do we stop? And I think that during the discussion before, we talked about the evolution of all these sports. We had, leather football helmets. We lost 2 football students in high school back in the latter 30s at my high school. They did a moratorium for 9 years, and later on they started up the program again with the different kind of helmets we did. Clearly that kind of a thing happens, but that was very significant for a, very small town. But the whole industry is going through this change. Now, we've talked about how there are some guidelines coming up very quickly, and I guess it's a year later in high school. I don't understand why that is. I didn't hear what the amendment that he was willing to take was, Madam Chair. Is it to put the timeline in to...
To go ahead and to make it consistent with what the national, what is it, in AAA, the National Baseball League is.
And that's like the end of 2011 or so, isn't it?
That's
going
the
into
2012 season. Yeah, and I think that's important, Senator, because what that says is bats that have already been deemed unsafe by the NCAA but are still going to be in use for the next couple of years, we're simply accelerating that precautionary step for the safety of the players.
Well, and I'm wondering whether we're the body to be doing that. Is there anybody from CIF here?
Yes.
In the back? You ready to speak on this issue? Come on down.
I'm willing to answer questions if you have.
I have some questions. It's my understanding that the legislature has we've delegated our authority over high school sports to CIF to come up with those standards. So my first question is, are you looking at this issue?
Yes, I'm Roger Blake. I'm the Associate Executive Director for the State CIF. The State CIF follows the National Federation of High School rules for baseball, and that's the one that the Chair has been referring to, and the change in the rules coming into effect in 2012.
Okay. So by following them, your rules will be changing basis that in the first 2012 season, right?
Correct.
Okay. Has your organization noticed any significant or statistical difference between wood bats or aluminum bats, or are you just going with whatever the National Association does?
Well, as the CIF, we're obviously much smaller than the National Federation and the NCAA. So we've looked to the NCAA and the National Federation for direction and research. As the research and the data is, there's significant research and data out there, and that's, I think, what's driving the NCAA and both the National Federation to fall in line. So independently as CIF, no. We don't have the backing, the expertise and the funding to be able to conduct this research. But the national level, obviously there is, and we follow that.
Yeah, okay, I appreciate that. I don't have any more questions for you, but there may be others that do. So that brings me up to the precedent. You know, when does the legislature jump in? You made a comment, I believe, in your opening statement that we've had metal bats for decades. We have some people that think it enhances. I will say I follow, along with Mr. Rand, you know, I'm one that couldn't hit the ball worth beans, and then, you know, with a metal bat for softball, I could hit a little bit better than beans, but not much. But it
That's why you became a senator, right?
Exactly. Well,
I've seen you hit, Senator.
Yes, you have. When they didn't get my right jersey, they kind of messed it up a year ago. But the point is, it's a bat that's more forgiving. It's a lot like these golf clubs that are huge. You're only going to, if I understand the physics of the sport well enough, you're still going to get the best and fastest, longest hit if you hit it in the sweetest of the sweet spots. And that's not going to change just because you have a more forgiving sweet spot. You're not going to get the leverage on it unless you're getting it at the right angle and all that other stuff. You would know that, Mr. Semmelman, because you actually do hit the ball very well. And I appreciate that. But well, he used an aluminum bat. He won all the advantage he could get.
Especially for the home run contest.
For the home run contest. But that brings up an interesting question, is why are we focusing on the bats right here when you have fielding and you have other things that cause injury? Why are we not looking at the composition of the ball, which would result in a safer sport overall?
Well, you know, Senator, I've had that conversation. I had a conversation a few weeks ago with a representative from the bat manufacturers, the Sporting Good Manufacturers Association, and at first he suggested, well, you know, maybe Gunnar Sandberg shouldn't have been pitching. He's a second baseman. Maybe he wasn't trained properly. Maybe he wasn't watching. And then he suggested maybe the balls are too hard. You know, so I guess I tend to push back when I hear those type of things. We've been playing with the same ball for a long, long time. Have we juiced the bats so much that second basemen can never try to be pitchers? Have we juiced the bats so much that we got to put duck feathers in the ball to prevent them from killing people? I think the ball should stay exactly where it is, but I'll tell you what, if the baseball community wants to put that on the table during the period of the moratorium, if everybody in a focused debate that this legislation can actually create the conditions for and help make happen decides that that's part of the solution, I'll accept that. I just want to see this debate happen. And the problem is, so far, despite lots of very serious Gunnar Sandberg-like tragedies, and yes, kids have died. Brandon Patch in Montana was killed because he was struck in the head. There was a kid in New Jersey that was killed because he was struck in the chest. And we're going to see more and more of this. Just in the time since Gunnar Sandberg's incident in March, a girl in Orange County was struck in the forehead with a softball. Now, female pitchers stand only 43 feet away from the plate. The ball's a little softer, but they had to reconstruct her forehead. She has a titanium forehead today. She will likely have permanent effects from the injury that occurred to her. So we can look at statistics. We can say, yes, baseball, relative to other things, is a safe sport, and I agree, of course. We can say there's risk inherent in sport, and there is. There's risk in athletic activity. You and I are old athletes. But you should have a risk.
Emphasis on old.
Emphasis on old. You should have a risk of injury, not of death. And that's really what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I'd like to finish up my question, and we can have people respond to this or so. But I am concerned, you talk about if the baseball industry wants to take up the density of the ball, or however you want to define that, they can. Well, you are interjecting yourself in the middle of the baseball community doing just what you're suggesting. They're doing it with bats, and they've come up with a timeline where they're changing and putting some standards that will not allow the ball to travel off the bat any faster than what it would off of today's wood. Right. And so they're coming up with a way to handle this. They've got a timeline to do this. We have CIF, that is the organization that we have given the responsibility to oversee this. They're doing their job, and yet for reasons that, at least according to the experts that I'm reading, and granted, I haven't had enough time to do a comprehensive evaluation of everything out there, but it seems like we are picking and choosing which statistics we choose to look at to compel us to adopt this temporary measure by anybody's standard. I just don't think the science backs this.
But let me, if I could...
And I'm going to ask you maybe to address these on your close.
Happy to
We've got
do
a
that,
number of
Senator.
other members who wish to have questions. Senator Liu, followed by Senator Wyland, then Senator Hancock.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think the questions from Senator Simitian and Senator Huff have covered some of my questions. So you are agreed to shortening the moratorium to 2012.
Yes, sir.
Okay. If the newly compliant bats are available prior to 2012, would you allow them to be used?
Here's the problem.
During the moratorium,
Yeah, here's the challenge. If there were standards to ensure that we don't continue to have this understated and masked performance difference between metal and wood, I would feel very comfortable doing that. The problem is there's lots of red flags to believe that the new standards that are coming into effect in 2012 are sort of just a moving of the goalpost. Remember, all of these standards at the NCAA level resulted from a settlement of a restraint of trade lawsuit when the NCAA tried to seriously restrict metal bats. Easton went to court, proposed this current standard in lieu of a restriction on the use of metal bats. Now as concerns have continued to rise, injuries have continued to happen, the demand for change has continued, they've interjected a new standard. We need to understand that standard, and I can't at this point say that I have confidence that it's addressed the problem. But certainly I'm willing to look at it as the bill continues to go forward. We will have an opportunity to work on the bill between now and the floor, and we'll have a policy committee, I'm certain, in the Assembly, probably the Education Committee over there.
Okay. I just... that's it for now, I think.
Senator Wyland.
This is obviously a really emotional issue, and there are lots and lots and lots of considerations. And it seems to me what it all boils down to is safety.
Right.
I don't think, with all due respect, it's marketing. We clearly, these bats, and the industry has said, allow more hits. On the other hand, they've also said that it gives kids greater chances. Well, when we all used wooden bats,
Didn't hit anything.
you didn't. There weren't as many hits,
Right.
and it's less
boring.
It's not as much fun for the hitter. The game is more boring. But as we talked the other day, you get that sweet sound, and we even have the phrase in the language, put the wood to it. But to me, it's all about the science, and I think we really have to separate the rest out with the science. And before I give my take on the science, I'd like to talk about other sports. And lots of us played football at some point. And I got a couple of concussions playing football. I have some neck issues. My cousin was a really good player, had back fusion because of it. If we're really going to look at safety, we wouldn't play. We'd absolutely eliminate Pop Warner football. Absolutely, you would eliminate it. And probably you'd eliminate football up to maybe 16, 17, and it's an inherently much more, I don't know what these numbers are, but in terms of severe injuries. And we had a young man in my district who had, here a couple of years ago, who had a similar head injury, and unfortunately the conclusion was not as positive as it was for this young man. And, it's people's bodies are not made to run into each other. On the other hand, if you like it, and loved the contact, but I just wasn't very big. So I think we need to separate that sport out as one that is idolized in this country. And I hate it when I see these kids playing pee-wee football. I just think they're way too young, and their dads are out there. And we all know the intensity. That gave the rise to soccer because of all of that. So, but when I look at this, and I just looked at the study that Senator Huff had by someone who has a PhD in applied physics, and we've heard other studies. And, you know, you and I had a conversation about this the other day. I hate being put in the position of trying to figure out science. And to me, this is science, and science about safety. This particular study looks at the various assumptions and says they're incorrect. But I'm sure there are other groups who may have the opposite view, and the fact that the NCAA is taking a look at it shows, and has devised a different standard, shows that they may have some other views. I think the only reason that I can't support it is that I don't like being put in the position, and I think it's wrong for us to be put in the position of evaluating science. Any of us who've been on health committee have seen the situation of having to try to make huge decisions based on conflicting science. And a couple of times I asked for the studies, and I got studies that thick, and I actually tried to read them. I can't read those studies. And we finally ended up with a commission to try to evaluate the science. So even though this is clearly any of these incidents are tragic, and they galvanize communities. My entire community was galvanized after this young man had this serious head injury. And it wasn't even obvious. There was no obvious hit to the head. I just don't feel comfortable with trying to evaluate the science. That being said, I'm willing. I'm willing to further, if this bill gets out, I'm willing to take more look at the science and see if I can somehow come to a conclusion. But that's my concern, purely safety. And I do think the industry, in advocating helmets of various sorts, is kind of implying that there may be an issue. Now, maybe the issue is base running and someone getting hit in the head by a hard throw. And we all know that pitchers have always, you're not very far from the plate, and a hard-hit ball, line drive coming right at you is going to be difficult. So anyway, those are my thoughts on it. I absolutely understand the reasoning behind the bill, but the science is just too unclear to me. And that's the safety issue to me.
Senator Hancock.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would also like to thank Assemblyman Huffman for bringing this bill to us. Clearly, it raises a lot of issues on a lot of levels. And the safety of student athletes is a primary one right now. I think that, especially with the alignment of the bill with the new NCAA standards, that it's just a prudent thing to do now while the discussion continues. But, Madam Chair, your comments on performance enhancement in high school and the use of these bats because they allow athletes to perform better. And I must say, a member of my staff is actually engaged to a scout who said he would never offer a scholarship or seriously consider an athlete that he didn't see playing with a wooden bat, because it was something like, that's the way you separate the athletes from the players or whatever. So that we have this traditional game, and we're changing the rules to make performance better in technological ways that have shown that they can hurt young people, perhaps irreparably. So if this bill should pass, I'm prepared to vote for it today. It's a short-term moratorium. I hope that the baseball community and the education community will address the underlying issue of, I think you could use the words grade creep, too. That what does it mean to enhance performance in ways that don't actually reflect an increase in skill? Let me put it that way. And what does this have to do with also the premature professionalization of high school students and a loss perhaps of the joy of the game? But that really would be something for the baseball community to consider. But I think you've raised all those issues by bringing this bill to us, and I thank you.
Senator Alquist.
Thank you. I'm sorry I missed the major part of the discussion, as I am a member of the Joint Legislative Audit Committee, which is still meeting. But just off the top of my head, I wonder what Babe Ruth would think about all this. And a couple other comments. I put the safety of the kids first. And I think especially since Assemblyman Huffman has taken the provision to align the standards, I think this is the right thing to do. And in terms of health and science, I chair the Senate Health Committee. I'm not a scientist. I was trained as a mathematician. But there are times when we are forced to make decisions. And in terms of criteria, one of the main things I put first is student safety. So I'm very supportive of this bill. I don't know if it's been moved yet. If not, I would like to do that.
Okay, and moved as amended. Thank you, Assemblymember Huffman. We appreciate the you bringing the bill forward. It's interesting. I think every member of the committee spoke today, almost every member, and to a large extent, because baseball is America's pastime. We go to the ball game. I'm a Dodgers fan myself. And so we do care deeply about the game. I mean, it's the sport, what it signifies. I agree, Senator Alquist, when you asked what would Babe Ruth think. And I think there's been so much that has occurred in baseball with respect to juiced athletes. To a large extent, the way that I do look at this particular issue is, steroid bats. So I think we do care. It is about safety issues. It is about having an opportunity to simply say, time out, and to have NCAA and others come to the table and to think about this, and for schools in our California as well, to think about the fiscal implications, but as well as this safety issues, and then just the old pastime of saying, just have fun, build teamwork. Your kids enjoy the sport. Having said that, I do want to be added as a co-author, as I indicated, and we will have every member speak because Senator Price wishes to give his 2 cents to play ball as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and to the author. We had a brief chat yesterday about this as a Little League and a Junior League baseball player, wooden bats, of course. I certainly appreciate the safety issue that's being raised here, and I think that your adoption of the moratorium that's in line with the NCAA does make a lot of sense. But I did get a couple of conversations yesterday had a couple of conversations with, small equipment goods, sporting stores, and these bats are a major, I don't want to say profit center for them, but the impact of restricting this product, it's going to have a negative impact on some businesses. How do you address that small business concern and those issues as it relates to, essentially just taking this product off the market because of some understandably safety issues, but, we can't say that the bats are the only reason for these safety concerns. So how do you address that?
Well, thank you for that question, Senator Price. And I guess the first thing I would say is I assume that we all agree that we have to put safety above profits, and we have to start from that proposition. That doesn't mean we can't consider the economic impacts of the decisions we make. And in that regard, I just want to point out that Easton, who's the manufacturer that you may have spoken with, a very leading voice on this issue, as well as every other major metal bat manufacturer, makes both metal and wood bats. So it is true that if this measure passes, that for the next couple of years they may sell a little bit fewer of the very lucrative metal bats in California for high school. Remember, this does not apply to Little League, does not apply to softball or anything else. Those bats are manufactured in China. the trade-off is that they will sell more wood bats, which are manufactured with American labor right here in the USA. So they, the retailers, everyone's going to keep selling bats. That's not going to be the problem. The problem is what kind of bats are we selling, and do we consider the safety concerns to be on par with the nice, thick profit margins that are associated with some of the high-end, high-performance bats. And I would argue that the time has come, in light of all of the evidence that we've seen, to put safety on par with profits on this issue.
Yeah, well, just to clarify, I didn't speak to Easton, but I did speak to sporting goods, smaller sporting goods shops in the areas, and those issues were raised. I think they're legitimate. Certainly, we do want to place safety over profits, but I think it's just important to consider that impact as well.
Assemblyman Huff, we have discussed this quite thoroughly. You can briefly close. There has a motion's been made on the bill to move it out of committee. We'll welcome a close from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks to all of you, Senators. You've been very generous with your time. Your questions have been terrific and thoughtful. This seems to me to be exactly the kind of debate that we need to make sure that the baseball community and baseball officials have during the next couple of years. And my belief is that this bill will create the conditions to finally have that debate in a context that actually moves it towards resolution. It's been raging for over a decade and a half. And the problem is, every time someone has gotten close to doing something, they've been slapped with a restraint of trade lawsuit by bat manufacturers. Passing this bill will provide the baseball community the cover to have this debate honestly and safely, and in the context of really putting safety truly on a par with profits, which is what I suggest we have to do. Now, the issue of science has been brought up several times, and I'm not surprised that the Kettering University study was mentioned. It's often mentioned. It was mentioned very prominently when the city of New York proposed a ban on metal baseball bats. And suffice to say that the credibility of that study was greatly undermined in that process. And the New York City Council, led by a conservative Republican, who I've been working closely with on this issue, passed that ban. They were sued in court, but the ban has held up, and it's been working beautifully in the city of New York. It's been working in the state of North Dakota. It's been working this season in the county of Marin. Baseball is going to continue. We're going to honor the traditions of this amazing game through passing this bill, but we're also going to put safety on a par with profits, and we're going to make a great game a little bit safer for our young athletes. Now, we're all probably old enough to remember that not long ago, tobacco companies hired scientists to tell you that cigarettes were safe. They actually hired doctors to recommend them to people, and they testified under oath in Congress to that effect. I don't want to go too far with that analogy, because baseball bats is not the same thing as cigarettes. I get that. I raise that point simply to point out that we can't take these nominally factual claims, nominally scientific claims at face value all the time. We have to consider the source and the credibility of them. You were told today that in the LA Unified School District, students were going to end up paying over $1,000 every season because of broken wood bats. If you do the math, understanding that wood bats cost between $30 and $60, that is an insane claim. It is false. Major League Baseball last year broke 0.5 bats per game for both teams. You would have to be breaking a bat almost every time you played a game, every player that played in that game, to get anywhere close to the replacement costs that were represented to you. So again, I urge you not to accept all of these so-called scientific and technical facts and data that's presented to you at face value. What you can accept are the facts that nobody disputes. Every study, including the one cited by Senator Huff, acknowledges that there's at least some performance advantage from aluminum bats. They hit the ball at least somewhat faster, 5 to 7 miles an hour on average in most of those studies. Now, you can have a PhD opine that that doesn't create a safety risk, or you can just think about it. The ball is traveling faster in a situation where pitchers already have a fraction of a second to react to a line drive. You're reducing reaction time. The sweet spot is increasing the number of those situations. You're putting pitchers in harm's way more often, and when they get hit with the ball, the injuries are going to be more serious because the ball is traveling faster. I don't think we need to go any further than those facts that everybody accepts as true to understand that we have at least some safety risk with these performance-enhancing bats. The question is what to do about it. I submit to you that we need to put this to the baseball community. and that the best way to do that is by passing AB 7 today. So I respectfully request your aye vote, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Secretary, call the roll.
Romero?
Aye.
Romero, aye. Huff? Alquist?
Aye.
Alquist, aye. Hancock?
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Lou? Price? Semidion? Wyland? Wyland, no.
Okay, the measure has 3 votes. We have a couple of members outside of the committee. We will put the measure on call.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Thank you for all the witnesses, both pro and con. Okay, back to playing the other real ball. Assemblymember Solorio, I believe you are next. And this is file item 3. Members, while he is coming to the dais, we have a couple of bills that are on consent. I'd like to take up the consent calendar at this time. The first item is file item 4. That's AB 1374 by Brownlee. The second one is file item 5, AB 1436 by Portantino. The Portantino bill is proposed consent with amendments. I'd like to take these 2 measures up with the consent calendar. Secretary, call the roll.
We need a motion.
Oh, is there a motion on the consent calendar? Moved by Senator Hancock. Call the roll.
Romero?
Aye.
Romero, aye. Huff? Alquist? Hancock? Aye. Hancock, aye. Lou?
Aye.
Lou, aye. Price?
Yes, aye.
Price, aye. Semidion? Wyland?
Aye.
Wyland, aye.
The measure has 5 votes. We'll keep the roll. We'll keep it on call. All right, Assemblymember Solorio, thank you. You've got AB 317. Welcome.
Thank you, Chairwoman and members. This bill deems any pupil absence related to the H1N1 influenza virus in any public school as an epidemic for the purpose of school districts receiving apportionments in fiscal years 2009-10 and 2010-11. This bill protects the health of students and allows schools to keep their regular ADA funding when students miss schools as a result of the H1N1 virus. I do know the analysis suggested that maybe this bill should only be applicable for the current fiscal year, but I would make to that 2 points. Number one, under the the governor's executive order, this fiscal year is already covered. 2, I would share with you some stats, and these are old stats as of November, as of last year. There were in California 354 deaths. 354 deaths last year as of November, 6,500 hospitalizations. We want to, have a situation where we protect the public health in schools. We want to give schools the appropriate tools to plan for that. We want them to be worried about the public health of the students rather than any impacts on ADA. We want them to be thoughtful of the public health concerns. This bill is supported by the CTA, CFT, the California School Boards Association, California Association of School Business Officials, and others. There is no opposition. I ask for your A vote as the bill is currently written. Thank you.
Okay, and before we hear from the proponents, there was the recommendation from the committee staff to take a look at the possible amendment here. My staff was chatting with me at the moment on this issue. This is what's been suggested. I want you to think about it. We're also, I will give this to you as well. We do know that seasonal flu and associated absences occur more so in the beginning of the calendar year as opposed to the latter part. We don't have as much information, but we know that there can be a greater concentration of absences at the end of the year as well. So we recognize the impact, the fiscal impact, and we're very concerned about it. What the committee staff is suggesting is maybe somewhat of a modification of that amendment to say something like that we would suggest the amendment that provides emergency ADA credit not for the whole fiscal year 2010-11, but rather until the end of the 2010 calendar year.
The 2010 calendar year, but the governor's current fiscal order, executive order, covers through this fiscal year. I guess you're saying maybe make it applicable through the latter part of of
The
the year.
2010-11.
If we're doing that based on fiscal concern, my thought is that's what the Appropriations Committee should be bringing up. I would offer here that what we want our schools to be making decisions based on the public health of children rather than whether they're going to get ADA or not. And again, I mentioned the stat that last year, as of November, we had 400 deaths almost as of the end of the year, and we want decisions based on public health concerns rather than fiscal concerns. I'm willing to, in appropriations, consider that. They may have other thoughts for how we address this if really this is a fiscal concern. But we do have other folks that want to give testimony and maybe could also speak to that.
Right, and again, too, and I will support moving the bill forward because I think it is a real issue. The cost issue, though, and then the timing of it, as far as what we know, it will come up. We thought we would just go ahead and raise it today.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
In terms of how we plan for the future. So we can either do it here, or if you wish to wait for
Yeah, I
appropriations.
think in
but the issue
appropriations,
will
they may
come
have
forward.
other thoughts for how we
All right.
address the fiscal elements. I would prefer to do it then. Thanks.
Witnesses in support. And if you have thoughts on this also, go ahead and share them with us as well.
Thank you. Madam Chair, Dennis Myers with CASBO. We're in support of the bill. When local health officials are advising school officials what to do when they see an outbreak of a flu, oftentimes we don't even know if it's H1N1, but with all of the media coverage, you just have to assume that that is the case. The first thing they indicate is to clear out the classroom, and sometimes we will see entire classrooms sent home, multiple classrooms sent home, or even entire schools closed for a week or two at a time on the advice of local health officials. This just takes the revenue side out of the equation because we should be first concerned about the health of kids and making sure that we're not spreading the flu. With regard to the question of making this go through the calendar year 2010, it's our understanding that the flu season would actually go beyond that. Flu season goes into January and February. So we just are looking at this as it's a 2-year thing through 9/10, 10/11, because that's what we're told the life of this particular strain is going to be, and this kind of plans ahead gives us a go-ahead to not be concerned about the fiscal consideration so that we can really only be looking at the health issues involved in. We ask for your aye vote.
Thank you. Other witnesses in support?
Good morning. Deborah Brown with the California School Boards Association, and we're also in support. We think this is important because the current law of not funding excused absences puts districts in a catch-22 where they want to protect student health, but yet they're at an adverse financial situation if they encourage students to stay out longer. And I think the recommendations are that students stay out 24 hours after the last sign of the illness, so after the fever. So schools should be encouraging kids to stay home because, as noted in the analysis, kids are efficient spreaders of the disease, and so we think it's important. And as Mr. Myers noted, we would support leaving in the 2 fiscal years for the bill. Thank you.
Okay, and all others, we received no opposition. I'm just simply going to ask you to identify yourself and say me too.
Good morning. Nancy Lacoste, and I'm representing both Sacramento City Unified School District and Clovis Unified School District, both adversely impacted by H1N1, and support the bill.
Terry Burns on behalf of Saddleback Unified School District, very much in support of the 2-year implementation of the bill.
Next.
Jeff Freitas with the California Federation of Teachers in support of this bill.
Andrew Keller on behalf of San Francisco Unified School District, and we are in support of this bill.
Laura Wasco on behalf of California Association of School Psychologists and California Association of Suburban School Districts in support of the bill.
Thank you. Any other witnesses in support? We did not receive opposition. Is there any? Senator Liu?
Assemblymember Solario, what is it that you're looking for?
Currently, there's an executive order that says that for the current fiscal year,
For the current
school
fiscal
districts
year.
don't get
Last
dinged
year,
for eight.
It was
AD
last year
absences.
and this year.
It was called for in November, and it covers the current fiscal year that we're in. So this bill says codify that for the current fiscal year, but also include this next fiscal year. Given that number of deaths and hospitalizations
Of the current year, through the current year, the past 2 years.
The bill calls for the current fiscal year and the fiscal year that begins July 1. And again, the flu season is typically from fall through about February.
And so we haven't, have you heard anything, if we just go through to the end of this current year, how many students have we lost to the H1N1 influenza virus for this current year?
At this point, I don't have that data, and I'm sure that the state's still collecting it. What I would add there is just that the state does have a very rigorous policy for how they tabulate ADA information. As this goes to appropriations, there, I'll work with them to see what the impact has been so far. But again, the public health of our kids should be prioritized over the cost.
I'm troubled by the perspective, going into a future year without knowing what that means. And I understand the difficulty it is for school districts not to count on ADA. But I just,
We're really just adding an additional year. It's a finite period of time. It's what we've heard from federal authorities that it's this time and next year to expect it. Young children are particularly vulnerable to H1N1, so it's just a good precaution. Hopefully there won't be a lot of absences. Hopefully there won't be deaths and hospitalizations, but this is just so that schools could plan for it, parents could plan for it, and we could put public health above ADA financial issues.
And I would indicate as well, too, this was part of the concern of the committee. I share the concern with you, Senator Liu, because we're sort of anticipating in the future without really knowing. But it is a fiscal issue to an extent. It's also a policy issue, I would argue. But we're willing to work with you. I think the issue undoubtedly will be addressed in appropriations, and you are talking to the chair of the budget subcommittee, so you know that this issue is going to surface again. So we've given you some suggestions, willing to, of course, move it out. It's an important issue, but I would urge you to take this under consideration and think about what you might offer when you get to appropriations.
Your analysis and your staff thoughts, I think, moving into appropriations provides a good framework for how to taper this down if the results to date are high. And again, hopefully there won't be a high incidence of H1N1 next year, and then the cost would even be less. And these are dollars that are already in the budget. We're just hopefully not going to see high absences or deaths, et cetera, due to H1N1.
All right, perfect. Any other questions? Is there a motion on the bill? I will move the bill. Secretary, call the roll.
Romero?
Aye.
Romero, aye. Huff? Alquist? Hancock? Liu?
Aye.
Liu, aye. Price?
Aye.
Price, aye. Semidian?
Aye.
Semidian, aye. Wyland?
The bill has 4 votes. We will keep it on call until we get everybody back.
Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you. Senator Semidian, would you please chair the committee while I present my bill? It's the last bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator Romero, this is Senate Bill 1422. Why don't we go ahead and ask you to present, please?
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. We have not received any opposition letters to this bill at this point. You saw a somewhat different variation of this bill last year. This is 1422. I'm very honored to be here today with the California Association of Student Councils, student representative and advisors. As you may recall, it's the students who come before the Education Committee at the very opening day of a session. They have chosen this issue to be their #1 priority. This is a bill that quite simply gives the students a voice in the evaluative feedback. I believe in having a strong voice for our students. This bill, as it's crafted, would simply authorize student governments of local high schools to establish a committee of pupils and teachers for purposes of developing a survey to allow students to provide feedback on teacher effectiveness and teaching methods. Once they are developed, teachers would have the surveys under their exclusive control, and they would use them for their own professional development purposes. The surveys, and I want to emphasize this, would not become personnel records. They could not be used for collective bargaining purposes, and school administrators could not obtain access to them without the teacher's written consent. I respectfully ask for an aye vote. We have, and we've got, of course, our witnesses in support, our student Mike Atkins, who's the Outreach Director for the California Association of Student Councils, and Dr. June Thompson, who is the Executive Director of the Association of Student Councils.
All right, thank you, Senator Romero. Why don't we ask your witnesses to begin? Please introduce yourself to the committee and then take just a couple of minutes, if you would, please.
All right, as she said, I'm Mike Atkins, Outreach Director for the California Association of Student Councils, Modesto High School class of 2010 and Yale College class of 2014. Just a little bit on CASC support and my personal support for this bill. One of the big initiatives that I've been working on a lot this year is called CASC 2020, and it's our vision for the ideal state of education in California by 2020. It's very much a grassroots effort, but the main issue that I've been pushing with all the groups that I've been talking to is some established system of student feedback to teachers. Everyone I've talked to, from LA to San Francisco to Sacramento, groups of students, groups of advisors, I've gotten nothing but overwhelming support, and they just want some help with the system. We've got over 80 years of research that confirm that a well-designed and correctly implemented and interpreted system is a perfectly valid and reliable measure of effective teaching. And students are the main source about the performance of a teacher in the classroom. And we're in the best position to be able to assess quality of instruction, quality of the relationship between the teacher and the student, and just generally what's going on. Nobody else has, no one other than me and all of my classmates have as much of a perspective and legitimate insight as to ways teachers are teaching very effectively and ways they can change to teach a little bit better than the students. The California Association of Student Councils fully supports SB 1422, and we're committed to providing all student governments in California with detailed guidelines and aid to implement this voluntary and confidential process. And there are two very specific things that we support: is the collaboration between students and teachers. People tend to support that, which they themselves create, and having everyone there at the table and the design will help make it work better. And then the confidential nature, because this is feedback in my mind, not necessarily an evaluation.
Thank you for your comments. Next witness, please.
Senator Simitian and members of the committee, my name is Dr. June Thompson. I'm the Executive Director of the California Association of Student Councils. I have direct involvement in process of student evaluation of teachers in 2 different districts early in my administrative career. At San Mateo High School, the students initiated a program that was voluntary and confidential. The first semester that it was conducted, only about 23% of the staff voluntarily participated. After the third semester, we were over 90%. And the dramatic change came about because of the detailed information that the students were giving to the teachers that they couldn't get from any other source. The students of California since 1963 have brought this issue before the State Board of Education every single year. That's 47 years of proposing that there be a process for student feedback directly to the teachers.
And I apologize for the interruption, but I was a member of CASC in 1968 when we were unsuccessful with that effort all those years ago. So I applaud you for your persistence.
So this is the third bill, I believe, that has been introduced on this measure, and we hope it is the first successful bill. The second experience I had with this process was at the Mountain View Los Altos High School District, which actually hired the 2 students who published on the first process. And they trained students in Mountain View Los Altos to develop the same process. The success of that was based on the fact that the students and teachers together came together to decide what good teaching was, and they developed a questionnaire jointly that the entire faculty had input on. After 5 years of running this as a voluntary and, again, confidential program, it was made mandatory through collective bargaining. And this process is still in effect in that district. It is mandatory for all non-tenured teachers, and numbers of tenured teachers also still participate in it, using the exact same questionnaire that was developed at the beginning. So CASC is prepared to provide guidelines that will outline steps to develop it, give them sample questionnaires, give them sample data, and also outline ways in which they can process this data. So we think it is time that the clients of the school system be engaged in the evaluation process of teachers and provide them the feedback that they cannot get any other way.
Thank you for your comments. Do we have any other witnesses in support who'd simply like to indicate their support by providing their name, their organization, and their support position? All right. If not, we'll ask if there are any witnesses in opposition. Do we have witnesses in opposition? If not, then we'll go to the committee. Senator Ahlquist.
Thank you. I think this is a very, very good bill. And having been very involved in student government many, many years ago, at some point, if you take amendments, I would like to be added as a co-author and would also like to move this bill. Thank you.
All right. Do we have any other comments or questions? Senator Liu.
Dr. Thompson, can you help the state of California create a teacher evaluation process that evaluates teacher effectiveness for school districts to determine who should belong or shouldn't belong in the classroom?
Our philosophy is that this is one part of the evaluation process, that it is only one part of it, but it is a critical part because the students are in the classroom every day. And we believe, as Mike said, that having the teachers engaged in the process of designing the instrument and defining what actually is good teaching and effective teaching is critical to this process, which is why we think it belongs at the grassroots. But we certainly can provide the guidance for developing it, implementing it, and making sure that it is valid and reliable.
I think we'll need your help in the near future.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions from members of the committee? If not, then I'm going to acknowledge. We have a motion actually from Senator Ahlquist, which I'll recognize at this time, and we'll allow the author to close if she wishes.
Thank you so very much. 47 years is a long time. We respect students. I mean, the respect of the student, I think, is really the essence of our educational system, and I respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Call the roll.
Romero? Aye. Romero, aye. Huff? Ahlquist? Aye. Ahlquist, aye. Hancock? Liu? Liu, aye. Price?
Aye.
Price, aye. Simidian?
Aye.
Simidian, aye. Wyland? You have 5 votes?
Okay, the measure has 5 votes. We'll keep it on call. Okay, members, we have concluded with our business. Let's go ahead and do the roll call for any members here to add on, and then I will check to see if any measures are on call. We'll check with those members to see if they're returning to committee. Okay, let's go ahead and call. So, Senator Hancock?
I think I missed just one vote, and that was Assemblyman Solorio's bill.
All right, well, let's start with Assemblymember Solorio's bill. Okay, this is file item 3. Call the absent members. Actually, the bill was not amended. We suggested fiscal costs, and we urged him to take a look at this in the Appropriations Committee. So it's not amended at this time. Okay, this is file item 3, Solorio. Call the absent members.
Huff? Ahlquist? Aye. Ahlquist, aye. Hancock?
Aye.
Hancock, aye. Wyland?
Aye.
Wyland, aye. 7-0.
7-0, that measure is out. We understand that Senator Huff will not be able to return to committee. He is on a panel at this time. Okay, the next file item is, let's do file item... File item 1, Romero, Senate Bill 1422. Call the absent members.
Huff? Hancock? Wyland?
Aye.
Wyland, aye. 6-0.
6-0, that bill is out. File item 2, this is Assemblymember Huffman, AB 7. Call the absent members.
Huff? Liu? Price?
Aye.
Price, aye. Simidian?
Aye.
Simidian, aye. Why? Okay, Wyland voted 1, 2. Yeah, 5-1. Bill is out.
5-1, that bill is out.
Sorry, which one is that?
Huffman. the bats. And then the consent calendar, these were file items 4 and 5 on the consent calendar. Call the absent members.
Huff. Alquist. Aye. Alquist, aye. Semidian.
Aye.
Semidian, aye. You have 7-1.
7-0. 7-0. The consent calendar is out.
We're done.
Okay, members, we have concluded Education Committee. Thank you. The committee is now adjourned.